The Fiona Harvey versus Netflix lawsuit is becoming the biggest lawsuit in pop culture easily since Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, and it is only getting more and more interesting by the day. Now, I've been very vocal on this channel about my disappointment in the Roth law firm over in the US who have taken on Fiona Harvey's case and are filing the suit against Netflix, and because of the hypocrisy within their complaints, but also within their measure in which they're doing things and how poorly things seem to be managed, with jabs being taken at Richard Gadd, the show's producer and writer, and also how poorly written their actual submission to the courts were. Just before we get into today's video, I want to let you guys know that we have just opened up 2 brand new YouTube channels. One called Simply Gaming, where we are keeping you up to date with all of the latest gaming news. We're also going to be doing live streams over there, follow along, let's plays, gameplay, all the rest of it, community games. It's going to be a great time. So if you're interested in gaming news and updates and games in general, get over there and subscribe to that channel. There will be a link down in the description and the pinned comment. And the other channel is called Simply Strange, where we take a look at some of the most popular videos on the internet and try to find little flaws in it to see if they're really what the creators want you to think that they are. But be sure to go over and subscribe to those channels if that is something that you guys are interested in. There are already videos over there for you guys to sink your teeth into, but I hope that you enjoyed today's video. Let's get on with it. Now, over on Piers Morgan, the Roth law firm man, Richard Roth, has actually joined Piers Morgan for a debate, and Piers asks him a lot of very interesting questions, which is exactly what we're going to be covering in this video today.
The Sunday Times over in the UK reported they had a source who said Richard Gadd was against calling it a true story, but Netflix insisted it needed to be. How significant could that be if that turns out to be true?
That's interesting. I'd never heard that before.
It's one thing if Richard Gadd says to them, it's true, it's true, it's true, and they fail to do their due diligence. It's even worse is if Richard Gadd says, well, I don't really want this to be a true story, and Netflix says, no, 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 we want it to be true.
That throws a fat old spanner in the works.
Fiona Harvey, the real Martha from Baby Reindeer, is suing Netflix for a whopping $175 million. The 34-page lawsuit claims the streaming giant is responsible for the biggest lie in TV history over its portrayal as Fiona as a twice-convicted and twice-jailed stalker. It also contends that Netflix did nothing to prevent Harvey from being identified, and that as a result, her life has been ruined. Well, media commentators say the result of the case could change how true stories are portrayed in TV and cinema forever.
Absolutely.
Well, Fiona Harvey's US legal representative, Richard Roth, joins me now from New York. Mr. Roth, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Now, Mr. Richard Roth, I have been very vocal about him. Obviously, like I said, the hypocrisy I found and the way that things have been managed and handled, not exactly the most professional. But I am willing today to eat my words if this man comes up with some kind of logical explanation behind those reactions.
Hey, Pierce, thank you for having me.
But my first question is an obvious one, but why have you taken Fiona's case?
Interesting.
I think there's probably
I mean, there's one reason. It's a fat old payday.
3 reasons. Obviously, I'm in the business of, making money, and I think there's a lot of money to be made here.
Fair enough.
I think the second reason is that it is really, it's just reprehensible when someone says something's a true story and it isn't. We deal, you and I just heard your last interview, deal with fake news all the time. And if Netflix is going to say this is a true story, then it better well be true. And to do that is irresponsible of them. And the third reason is that Fiona Harvey is, you've had her on your show. She's been destroyed. She's been shattered by this. She gets death threats. She doesn't want to leave her apartment. So there's really 3 main reasons, all of which are really important.
What do you believe will end up being the smoking gun of this case?
There's a lot of smoking guns. The first is, and I've heard, I familiarized myself with your interview, your prior interviews with Mark Garagos, great lawyer, and other people. And one of the big smoking guns, which is actually what he pointed to, is that you don't put "this is a true story" on the first frame of a 6-part series unless it's gone through the ringer. Who actually said it's a true story? Was it done by, did legal look at it? And so It's not a true story. I mean, we know it's incontrovertible. It is not a true story. There's
Well, there is also, and I'll be interested to see if Piers brings it up, or, he's never actually brought it up in his interview, so I'm not even sure if he's aware about it. It must be. But at the very end, obviously, it does state that this is based on a true story, and certain situations, characters, events have been dramatised for the sake of the show and all the rest of it.
clear falsities in it, which are very damning. So I think one thing is going to be what did Netflix do to determine whether or not this was a true story? Because it's clearly not.
Yeah, and not only that, but bizarrely, they sent down one of their top executives to the UK Parliament. Well, under oath, he once again stated two things that were blatantly untrue. One is that she was a convicted stalker that Richard Gadd had been terrorised by, and we know that that person they were talking about was based on Fiona Harvey. And secondly, they'd done everything they could, they said, to...
Well, just on that, I will say that Fiona Harvey stated herself that she knew that it was about him. So, at the same time, Netflix and Richard Gadd haven't actually confirmed, nor denied, I will say, that it is her.
Protect the identities of the real people being found out. And yet we know from internet sleuths that literally within minutes of the series airing, people tapped into the internet or social media specific phrases from stuff that was being put on screen as being sent by the supposedly fictitious stalker to Richard Gadd. He's playing himself to compound it. And they found the exact same phraseology on Fiona Harvey's Twitter feed, for example. So it could only have been her. So she was identified immediately. So the duty of care, it seems to me, just collapsed and was almost non-existent. And once you assume that it's Fiona Harvey they're talking about because they're using her exact phraseology, you then move to, well, okay, they've called it a true story. Was she ever convicted, as they claim?
Right, so obviously the guy that went into Parliament, I forget his name, Benjamin King was his name. He has come out since, and it's interesting that Piers didn't bring this up, but he has come out since to state that what he said under oath was what he was told. And that was that this was a true story, and it was Richard Gadd's story of a, quote, convicted felon. Obviously, we now know we don't know anything really. We don't know if that is absolutely the case or not, but that's what he said.
Twice, and I interviewed the supposed first victim of this convicted stalker,
Laura
Ray, who was this Scottish lawyer, who was a very nice lady, who I did think had a very difficult time with Fiona. We can come to that part of this. But she made it clear that no, as far as she was aware, Fiona Harvey never went to prison. I never went to court over this. She got an interim edict. And after that, she didn't hear from her again. Similarly, Richard Gadd at the end, the big denouement, Fiona Harvey in tears in court, breaks down, I did it, and gets another 8.5 months in prison to go with the previous supposed 4-year sentence. And again, that doesn't seem to have happened. I've got the background check here that you guys did, and there's no record of Fiona Harvey.
The background record, again, was from, I know I keep repeating myself, but it's for anyone that's new. It was a basic DBS check, which over in the UK, in case you don't know, you've got 3 levels of a DBS check. You've got a basic, you've got a standard, and you've got an enhanced. Now, a basic only goes back as far as 5 years. I've done my research on this, so, go back and check out that video. This is all on the accessible information on the gov.uk website. It gets scratched after 5 years. So this incident happened back in 2014, 2015, I believe. So obviously that information is going to be wiped from the system, and it's classed as a spent conviction. So it's not going to show up on a basic DBS. And at the same time, if you really want to settle this home and have a smash out the park home run, provide an enhanced DBS, which goes through every nook and cranny of every single person and shows every conviction to have ever been bestowed upon them, whether it be spent or unspent. But they went down the route of a basic DBS check, which actually doesn't show much.
Under any of the names she's ever used, ever having any criminal record. So if you put all those things together, I mean, look, I'm not a lawyer, but I've spent a lot of time around lawyers. It does seem to me you've got a pretty open and shut case.
Well, so you raise a lot of things. Number one, nobody goes to testify in front of Parliament without being thoroughly prepared. Think about it. There are teams of lawyers that are going to sit there and ask the questions, get the information, because he knows what is being asked. So it's so irresponsible for him to testify under oath in front of Parliament saying she was convicted when it's clear she wasn't. That's the first thing. The second thing you raise is that, you said the word internet sleuths. I think that's sort of a loose term. I could get it on the internet. You don't have to be a sleuth.
That's really what I mean. Anyone.
No, I know what you meant. My point is it was very easy for anyone and everyone. And in fact, your guy, John Dingwall, who was on one of your prior episodes, said, I just Googled the real name of Martha. So it really was a very simple thing to find out. In today's day and age, you have to make sure you don't make her Scottish, make her look different, use different tweets, use different Facebook pages. And so it was really irresponsible for them to do that. And that's the second thing you raise. And you're right. It's remarkable that Netflix, one of the largest corporations in the world, and the leader, if not one of the leaders of streaming, would literally put this on their cover page and say this is true. To me, it's very, very, very strong.
Again, the argument that's being made as well is that the this is a true story is written by Donnie, not Richard Gadd. Now, there is a difference because Donnie is a fictional character and Richard Gadd is the real-life counterpart. It gets very confusing, but long story short, obviously at the very end, Donnie pulls up his computer. It's got the police report of the timeline of events that happened between him and Martha. And then he starts writing the screenplay, Baby Reindeer. And within that, the idea is that the very first sentence written on the paper of the script for the screenplay is this is a true story. Therefore, it is kind of like a full circle moment to the very beginning of the show. That's what people have speculated. Again, that is only speculation. I can't say that that is true or not.
The Sunday Times over in the UK reported at the weekend that they had a source who said Richard Gadd was against calling it a true story, but Netflix insisted it needed to be. How significant could that be if that turns out to be true?
Now, that changes everything, right? Because I didn't know this prior to this interview. So, if Richard Gadd has stated that this isn't actually a true story, but Netflix have said that it has to be, that then means that puts a seed of doubt in my mind that this show actually has been publicised as something that it isn't by Netflix to kind of make it a bit more of a wow when it comes out, which does put me on the defensive against Netflix a little bit.
Well, it's actually great news for me. I heard about that story this weekend, and think about it. If it's one thing if Richard Gadd says to them, it's true, it's true, it's true, and they fail to do their due diligence. It's even worse is if Richard Gadd says, well, I don't really want this to be a true story, and Netflix says, no, we want it to be true. The information they get from the person who actually, and the other thing is he wrote it, he starred in it, right? The information they get is, this isn't true, and they say, we don't want to listen to you, we're making it a true story. I mean, we're going beyond, this is far worse than negligence. This is intentional misconduct if they actually were told, don't make it a true story, and they said it were true.
I agree. That's messy and messed up, and they might have shot themselves in the foot there.
The other part of it is quite interesting to me, which I've been saying a lot actually on my show. Point 25 of your lawsuit says Gadd is a self-admitted crack, meth, and heroin user with a self-admitted history of masturbating to Fiona Harvey, following her home and spying on her through her window. And I've made this point, really, that by his own admission, Richard Gadd is a very damaged individual.
Also, another interesting point is that obviously these were questions or points that were raised to Fiona Harvey within the interview. Piers Morgan actually outright asked her, did Richard Gadd ever follow you home? She said no. So by that point, that shouldn't make it into the legal paper, no?
Who did a lot of, pretty damaging stuff to himself and to others. And that I guess, points to his reliability in all this, not least if he ends up under oath in a courtroom.
Yeah, I mean, the guy he has no credibility. He has no credibility at all. And what he put in that story about himself is really it's bothersome. All the issues about being raped and going back to the guy, everything he has in there, and he's claiming that's all true. So the person they most rely on for the truth of the story has been shattered before I even get to cross-examine him.
You know what
Is that a fair point to make, though? I'll leave that to you. I don't think that's a fair point to make, because I think he has to be quite self-aware to actually include that within the show. Instead of blaming it on everyone else, he does say, I played a part in this too.
It struck me, and I've got no basis for knowing this to be true, but just looking at the trajectory of all this, Richard Gadd definitely goes through some experience with Fiona Harvey. They both go through some experience. My view of it has always been they were both pretty damaged people when it was going on, whatever it was. And that he then does this show up in Edinburgh on stage, and it starts to get real traction and popularity. And he's desperate to make it as a comedian, having been very unsuccessful. And then Netflix hear about it, and it all kind of goes to his head. And he gets to star in his own dramatization of his own show. He gets to be all over it. He gets to write it. For him, coming from where he's come from, this is a fantastic opportunity, and potentially could make him very rich, right? So there's that kind of temptation, if you like, to bend a few of the rules. And the reason I say that, he told Vanity Fair, I would say the broad strokes are very much true, but he admitted to tweaking the timeline and changing some details of the story.
That has been outlined within the show, though, on the very final scene of the credits. Admittedly, they did kind of hide it to literally the last phrase. It does state that, exactly that. This show, not to quote it, but, it states loosely that the show has been tweaked to dramatize and better fit the dramatization of the story.
And this plays, I think, Richard, to this kind of modern day thing of the truth doesn't matter, it's my truth that matters. Well, actually, I don't think courtrooms really recognise my truth very much. They tend to stick to what they view as incontrovertible, provable facts. And that is where I think if this does end up in court, particularly with a jury trial, that they could really come unstuck.
You're absolutely right. And that was one of my three reasons. The first question you asked me, what is truth? And what's interesting, and you pointed it out, Pierce, I give you credit for it because you put it out before I even noticed it, is that when Netflix came back, they didn't say we stand by the story being true. They say we stand by Richard Gadd telling his story. Well, that's very different than saying it's true. So we have Richard Gadd, who's running from the facts of the series, and we have Netflix running from the facts of the series, and they're doing so because there's so much in there that are just fabricated. And when you talk about truth and fake news and what we live in this whole world where we hear it and we believe it. And when you read that, when you hear this and you believe this is a true story, you have an obligation, as I don't care if you're a network, I don't care if you're a newscaster, I don't care if you're a streamer, to be honest.
Yes.
They didn't say it was based on a true story. They didn't say it was inspired by a true story. They said this is a true story. And you know what? If it's not, then they have to be held accountable.
This is a more difficult question, but when I interviewed Fiona Harvey, I mean, she wasn't the most sympathetic interviewee I've ever come across, right? She's quite abrasive, she's quite combative. And talking to Laura Ray, who was the Scottish lawyer that she certainly, I would say that she harassed her quite badly, and certainly behaved badly towards her. Does any of that matter? I mean, does it matter what Fiona Harvey may have been like in terms of trolling people, maybe even harassing people, if it doesn't cross a line of criminal behaviour? If a network like Netflix, in this show under the title True Story, says you are a convicted stalker, does any of what Fiona Harvey may have done that doesn't cross that line matter?
I think it should, because it paints a picture of her as a person. Because obviously, there is the Laura Ray stuff, but let's not forget there's also the Keir Starmer stuff, when he was not even her constituent, or her MP, sorry. He was a neighbouring MP in a neighbouring constituency, so she shouldn't really have had any dealings with him. But she literally sent him, I think it was 294 letters or emails. Some even going beyond politics and outlining that she was going to make his life, quote, not worth living, and also harassing his disabled wife, which, you know, says a lot about her as a character.
So here's what matters. And you pressed Laura Ray. I actually watched that interview as well. You pressed her on whether or not the conduct that Fiona engaged in was criminal. And she said it wasn't. You have to actually physically hit someone to be criminal. And you even asked her, have the laws changed? Would it be criminal today, even though this is 22 years ago? And she said, no, it never was criminal. I never filed a criminal complaint. And yet Netflix has on its story, while Richard Gadd is doing his due diligence, his research, that she was in jail for 4.5 years. And even Laura Ray said, you wouldn't be in jail for anywhere near that amount of time. So that's what becomes relevant. The fact that there was something happened with 22 years ago with Laura Ray and Fiona, I don't really care about that. But what I care about is that Netflix and Gadd represented that she was twice convicted, once before and once during the show. But while he's doing his investigation, he says she was a criminal for 4.5 years. And Laura Ray said, none of that is true. And even Laura Ray thought that was irresponsible.
I'd be interested to see what the take is on Laura Ray, because obviously Laura Ray did say in her interview with Piers Morgan that should Fiona Harvey win the legal case against Netflix, she will go ahead and sue Fiona Harvey for damages from 22 years ago. So she said she wouldn't bother doing it now because Fiona Harvey's got nothing. There is no point in suing her because what can she gain from it? A few quid. Whereas $170 million, it's quite a big sum of money, isn't it?
I'm curious about your decision to do this in California. For example, if you did it in England, I know this from when I used to run newspapers here, the libel laws here are much tougher. You know, you would have probably had an easier legal battle here, I would argue, than in America. So why the choice of venue of California, and why this gigantic figure that you've come up with of $175 million?
So the reason, two questions. I'll give you the answer to both of them. The reason why California is because we don't want to engage in all kinds of procedural motions by Netflix. We've seen lawsuits against Netflix. We've seen them against Hulu. They will move for forum nonconvenience. They'll move for wrong jurisdiction. We're going right for that. We're going right for them. They can't get out of the fact that they are domiciled in California. So we're doing away with a lot of procedural lawyer arguing and legal motions. So that's the answer to your first question. California is where they're from, and they have to be responsible in California. The second question, $170 million. It is a huge number. No question about it. But some of the causes of action in the complaint entitle Fiona to the profits that Netflix obtained from this series.
They made an assumption that was around $50 million, by the way. There was I went through the complaint yesterday, watching a video from a lawyer who also went through the complaint, and there was outlined specific figures for each kind of thing that Fiona would be entitled to.
That's what the law provides. That if they wronged her, then she is entitled to their profits. We don't know what that number is. Again, this is very early. We just filed a lawsuit. But we know that over 60 million people have viewed it. We know that it either has or is becoming the largest show ever on Netflix. And we know that Netflix is making a tremendous amount of money from it. In fact, Richard Gadd is on a U.S. tour promoting it.
Yeah.
Richard Gadd was in New York last week at having a discussion. He was on the Today Show in New York. He was on the Tonight Show. So they are pumping this. They are pumping this story, and they're making oodles of money from it. So we will see once we get discovery what the real profits are.
Netflix says they intend to defend this matter vigorously, and they stand by Gadd's right to tell his story. But as you pointed out, that's not quite the same as saying we stand by this as being a true story.
It's huge. I mean, to me, it's even an admission. Now, obviously, it's a public statement, but yeah, why wouldn't we're already seeing a lot of divisiveness between Netflix and Gadd. Gadd saying he told him it wasn't true. Gadd saying he bended, and then Netflix is just saying, we will stand behind it, that they have to deny the allegations, and we'll see where this plays out. It's going to be a very interesting path.
I'm still going down the route that Netflix will just settle out of court. Like, they'll just be like hush money, just shut up, go away, don't ever come back kind of thing.
roadmap we're on. But I will tell you that Netflix has unbelievable responsibility, culpability for saying at a minimum that she's a twice-time convicted felon. You
Yeah.
saw the scene where she's crying and she pleads guilty.
Yes.
That's all fabricated.
Well, this is what I've been saying from the start. Is that I listen. I don't think it's Richard Gadd. I think he's a talented guy. I thoroughly enjoyed the series, right before I ever sat down with Fiona. But when I sat down with her, I was struck by a number of things about her in the interview. One, she conducted herself with remarkable confidence, given she'd never done an interview of that kind in her life. Secondly, the damage to her and her privacy and everything else, and the threats she'd been receiving was clear and palpable, and was having a clearly palpable effect on her. But thirdly, I was really curious when I pushed her on things like, look, Netflix say in the series, they list 41,000 emails. They talk about X number of text messages, X number of this.
Let me just say as well that this was never raised within the lawsuit against Netflix, the 41,000 emails. That was never refuted within the lawsuit, and it never came up once. The only thing that actually came up, and they're liable for, is the 2 times prosecution against Fiona Harvey. But they literally don't talk about the 41,000 emails. They don't talk about the voicemails. They don't talk about the text messages or the tweets at all.
Very, very precise. And I sort of thought, well, they would only do that, Netflix, if Richard Gadd had actually supplied them with the evidence of those numbers of things. Do you have any knowledge yet from Fiona's side? Has she shown you anything which either supports that those numbers are correct or actually contradict them?
We've seen nothing near 41,000 emails. And as Fiona said, think of how long it would take to write 41,000 emails. So
he's not going to sit there and say, yeah, that part did actually happen. Yeah, I know Fiona said that didn't happen on your show, but we have kind of seen otherwise. He's not going to do that. I know there has been a letter sent out from the Houses of Parliament to Benjamin King, the one of the higher ups at Netflix, to present that information to Parliament. But as of yet, we don't actually know if that's true or not.
So we will get it in Discovery. We don't have it yet, nor do we believe it exists. But to your other point, this is a woman who was really thrust into the limelight. This is not a situation where you have a public figure who essentially was defamed. This is a situation where a woman lives her own life, and she all of a sudden found getting death threats, can't leave her apartment. Really, just inappropriate. Why is Netflix not calling her up and saying, listen, we're about to do this story. We'd like you to look at it. We'd like to fact check. I mean, my God, Pierce, that's all you do is fact check all day. You know what the laws are.
Right.
And it's terrible. And you saw how nervous she was on there. She's also a very bright woman. She has her legal degree. She's very bright. She was very nervous. She didn't, personally, she was thrust into the limelight, which is unfortunate. But she stood her ground, and I will, to your credit, you're not an easy cross-examiner. And so it was not easy for her, and she's very nervous, destroyed, tattered from this.
The show's end credits, as some people have pointed out, say the program is based on real events. However, certain characters' names, incidents, locations, and dialogue have been fictionalized for dramatic purposes.
Oh, I'm intrigued about this.
Does that make any difference if at the start you've said this is a true story?
And my answer is good luck with that. I mean, that's a disclaimer, which after you've seen the whole thing, to us, it doesn't make any difference. They don't, they put it at the end when people are ready to go to watch another series. They make it very clear from the inception of this story that it's a true story. And the reason why it got such big attention is because it's a crazy story to be true. So if Netflix is the one pushing for the true story lingo up front, then at the end the argument that we have this little disclaimer at the end that it could be fictionalized means nothing to me.
This may or may not come to court. We'll have to wait and see how Netflix conduct themselves. But what is the onus in California? Is it on you to prove these allegations are untrue, or is it on Netflix to prove that they are true?
Interesting.
It's on Netflix to prove that they are true. She's not a public figure, and there's two different tiers. If you're a public figure, it's easier under the anti-SLAPP statutes for the press to win the case. But when you're this person who sits in your own apartment and all of a sudden you've been thrust in the limelight, they're going to have to show. They're going to have to show that they have the facts to support their claim. And quite frankly, I don't know how they're going to do it. She wasn't convicted once. She wasn't convicted twice. Are there 41,000 emails? Was she, did she do all the things that they allege in there? We have several facts in the complaint, and it's detailed for a reason.
Interesting terminology used there is he's, instead of stating they can't do that, they'd have to back up these points that they make. They can't do it because it just didn't happen. He says, I don't think they can. Which are two very different things. One is you think, and one is you know. He seemed very confident but says that he thinks that they can't do it. The terminology is very important there, and, does he know more than he's letting on? That's the question.
Listed, which say this didn't happen, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, and this didn't happen. Let's see what Netflix comes back with, because right now, we're hearing a little sort of dance going on that, we believe he should tell a story, Gad retracting himself. So, yes, it's their obligation to tell us that if they wrote a story, it better darn well be true.
Have you been talking regularly to Fiona throughout this process?
Yes, I speak to her regularly, yes.
And
yes.
How is she doing?
I mean, honestly, she's not well. She's clammed up in her apartment. She doesn't know what to do, doesn't know where to go. She's hurting. I mean, she really has been shattered by this. The people, there's going to be a big percentage of the populace that don't believe her and think she is the Martha who's depicted in the series, and so she's afraid to go out and get groceries. It's that bad.
Well, I appreciated the coming on Uncensored. I appreciate you coming on Uncensored. I'm going to be following this with great interest because I think it's a fascinating case. My final question, there are massive wider implications from this. There was a case at the weekend, Steve Coogan and a project he was involved in, now moving forward in a defamation case where they identified somebody. Do you think this is going to be potentially a tipping point for the entertainment industry?
I think it should be. It's very easy to say this is inspired by a true story. This is based on a true story. I think it should be. We live in a world of fake news, and if this is fake, then they should be held accountable. I guarantee you that the next time Hulu, Max, you name it, Paramount Plus, Netflix, etc., even YouTube TV does a story and they claim it to be true, there's going to be a ton of lawyers who are going through the facts to make sure that they're right. And I'm very curious to see what Netflix did here to confirm the veracity of what they say is a true story.
All they had to do is what they did with The Crown. Just say it's based, they didn't say with The Crown, this is a true story. They made it clear that they changed stuff. And that's what you have to do.
And what compounds it is such a vile story. I mean, the acts in there are horrific.
Yeah. And
to attribute a woman who's never been in the limelight and has never had any to face the press on this, this could be a watershed moment for streaming TV.
And just finally, sorry, if it does go to court in California, will Fiona give evidence? Will she testify?
Oh, she'll certainly give evidence. We'll have Richard Gadd testify. We'll have her testify. We're going to have a string of people at Netflix testifying as to what they did, why they agreed to the language in the front, what they did to check it. I also can't wait to find out how King, whatever his name was prepared in front of Parliament, who testified in front of Parliament. My goodness. I mean, that's not a blunder. That is real inappropriate conduct.
Well, we've already had members of Parliament asking that Netflix come back and respond following the revelations that came after. It was a Netflix executive called Benjamin King. It was giving evidence at Westminster's Culture, Media, Sport Committee in Parliament under oath. If he's misled Parliament, that's a pretty serious offence in this country, and it could have, again, big repercussions for Netflix corporately.
And big repercussions for my lawsuit. Honestly, if he goes in front of Parliament and says I lied or I was wrong or I misspoke, that's very problematic for Netflix.
Richard Roth, great to see you. Apparently, I did meet you at the finale of Celebrity Apprentice in 2008, when I won it. You were there, apparently.
I was at the finale. I have a very good dear friend, Carol Alt, who was
Oh,
one of
I
the...
love Carol.
Right. Piers Morgan talking about his Apprentice moment once again and how he loves Donald Trump for that. But anyway, what do you guys think of this? Obviously, we are yet to hear from the Netflix side of things. It is all very, very one-sided at the minute. Hearing from Fiona's kind of camp. I want to hear from Netflix's side of things. You know, get the other side of the story. But obviously, they're not going to say much right now because they're under the cosh. And if they say anything right now, this man right here, Richard Roth, will be there with pad and pen, quoting everything. So they have to be incredibly careful with what they say. But how do you think things are going to pan out moving forward? Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below while you're down there. Be sure to jump scare the hell out of that like button. Subscribe if you're new and tick on my little bell so you get notified whenever we upload to the channel. And until next time, guys, I hope that you have enjoyed and I'll speak to you later. Peace.